history of government, not just American government, but the history of government well enough to know that most governments acquire power and they do not like dissent. We are losing our freedoms in the United States. Most Americans do not realize that we have free speech zones in the United States. I mean, talk about an oxymoron. You know, all of the 50 states are a free speech zone. You're an American. That by definition creates a free speech zone. We have freedom of speech because we stand up and say what we think, not because the Founding Fathers ratified the First Amendment in 1791. So if we're losing the free speech zones, the governments in general throughout history have tried to quell dissent by controlling the media, which we already have in this country, and by generating fear of confrontation.
After Seattle, the feds said we can't allow protests anymore in America. It's too dangerous. That's why we're going to have free speech zones miles away from where the events are, in baseball fields, in church parking lots, where nobody can see you or hear you. You've got your First Amendment, but you've got it way over here miles away. That all started as a beta test in Seattle in '99 with the police, after they'd staged the riots, with hired anarchists, coming up to people saying nowhere in the city could they even wear a pin saying no WTO. And the police say, hey, First Amendment is suspended in Seattle, and the news pushed it like it was a good idea and the right thing to do.
The lines are open. This is First Word, ladies and gentlemen. At 877-367-2526. Whatever's in your head, call and share it at this moment. Hello.
Yeah, how you doing, Alan? My name's Austin from Florida. I was recently looking around on the Army's website, Army.mil, and I came across this document called the Civilian Inmate Labor Program. This was put on in 2005, and I was just like reading over the first couple pages. Just in the first couple pages, this document on the Army's own website talks about converting military bases and installations into giant prisons and establishing civilian inmate labor programs. Have you ever heard of it?
No.
This is on Army.mil, if anyone wants to look it up.
Okay.
It came out in 2005.
Another conspiracy theory.
This is on the Army's website, sir.
All right, so we're all going to be in prison, right? They're going to have prison camps?
I don't know, but, I mean, obviously there's a document that has established...
Yeah, there are lots of documents in lots of places.
But this is on the military's own website.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Army.mil.
Okay. I'm at Army.mil. Says the link's broken. There's no such Army.mil. Can you get to Army? I can't get to Army.mil.
Army Regulation 210-35. Now, this was set up in 1986 secretly. And for 10 plus years, it was secret. And in 1997, Bill Clinton declassified this, and we were the first major radio show to cover it. Since then, it's been expanded. This lists 12 camps to hold American citizens that have been built by the United States Army. And ladies and gentlemen, some of these facilities have U.S. citizens in them now. But it's all being done administratively. To beta test the Army running camps, they did deals with the federal government and now states to take prisoners convicted in the civilian courts and to then stick them on U.S. military bases administered by the Bureau of Prisons but operated by the U.S. Army. So see, they're taking state and federal prisoners and sticking them under Army control and building these civilian inmate labor camps all under Rex 84 right out in the open, and no media will ever touch this.
Beginning in October, the Army plans to station an active unit inside the United States.
Under NORTHCOM and under the new Homeland Brigade, it was first going to be 3,000, and then 20,000, and then 40,000.
The 3rd Infantry Division's 1st Brigade Combat Team has spent 35 of the last 60 months in Iraq.
Combat-hardened troops who've been running camps and centers in Iraq are now coming back to the United States to, quote, carry out law enforcement actions.
The Army unit may be called upon to help with civil unrest and crowd control.
There has been some concern and some misimpressions that I'd like to correct. The primary purpose of this force is to provide help to people in need in the aftermath of a WMD-like event in the homeland. This force has got no role in civil disturbance or civil unrest, any of those kinds of things.
The Army Times reporting, quote, they may be called upon to help with civil unrest and crowd control or to deal with potentially horrific scenarios, end quote.
NORTHCOM, the Northern Command that came into being in October of 2002, when that came in, people like me were concerned that the Pentagon was going to use its forces here in the United States, and now it looks like, in fact, it is, even though on its website it says it doesn't have units of its own. Now it's getting a unit of its own.
And the Army Times said during civil unrest inside the United States that the Army's new job would be engaging the American people.
The Posse Comitatus Act of 1878 generally prohibits federal uniformed services from carrying out domestic law enforcement duties, except in cases expressly authorized by the Constitution or an act of Congress.
They can't just come in and say, you know, I want to see everything in your car. I want to see everything in your house. I want to go through your computer. You either have to voluntarily hand that over to them, or they have to have probable cause and get a warrant to do that. So it's very clear that the government does not have the authority to be spying on us. That was not the intent of our founders when they created this system of government.
Over the last decade, we've seen the introduction and enactment of some of the most dangerous legislation ever to be conceived by our elected officials, who have not forgotten who they serve, but only now reveal to the American people through the fruit of their own actions that our rights and our freedoms are secondary. The USA Patriot Act allows for American citizens to be picked up and incarcerated indefinitely without charges, and allows law enforcement to conduct warrantless and secret searches of Americans' property and possessions. The Military Commissions Act dissolved the cornerstone of our Constitution by removing the writ of habeas corpus, allowing the permanent imprisonment of enemy combatants, and disallowing petitions to the court to know why you've been locked up in the first place. Although never passed by the Senate, the Violent Radicalization and Homegrown Terrorism Prevention Act shows us the mindset of our leaders in Washington. If passed into law, the bill would make public demonstrations and protesting into an act of terrorism and label the organizers as thought criminals and potential homegrown terrorists. Now that the federal government has the authority to sneak, snatch, and lock up its own citizens, a new bill has been introduced by Congress that gives the feds a place to hold those outspoken dissenters and potential domestic terrorists. The National Emergency Centers Establishment Act, or H.R. 645, allocates military bases to be converted into FEMA emergency centers. It also mandates that these camps be built complete with public works, medical, and educational facilities, just like the Japanese internment camps of the 1940s.
Why is the media on one hand saying there are no FEMA camps, but on the other hand, legislation has been introduced to build them?
H.R. 645, titled the National Emergency Centers Act, directs the Secretary of Homeland Security to establish national emergency centers throughout the United States.
It's all being done for your own good.
The bill directs these camps to be built in existing military installations, whether operational or not, for the stated purpose of providing temporary housing and to meet other appropriate needs as determined by the Secretary of Homeland Defense.
Here's H.R. 645 legalizing what has already been developed, what's already been paid for by FEMA. And that is these FEMA camps for everybody's safety, these FEMA camps for everybody's comfort, these FEMA camps that the people need during emergencies.
The government doesn't build things that are not needed or that there aren't contingency plans that say there's a reason for them.
Also, it's been reported by WorldNet Daily that the Department of Homeland Security has already awarded nearly a $400 million contract to Halliburton to build some temporary detention centers on an as-needed basis.
We know this is their main attack